I had always dreamed of living in a beautiful, well-maintained neighborhood, one where I wouldn't have to worry about crime, poor infrastructure, or unkempt properties. So when I had the opportunity to purchase an entire residential development, I took it without hesitation. I had worked hard for years to build my wealth through real estate investments, and this was my biggest project yet. But here's the catch. I didn't announce that I was the owner. Instead, I lived in one of the houses just like everyone else, blending in as a regular resident. I enjoyed having the freedom of home ownership without all the unnecessary attention that came with being a landlord or property developer. I specifically chose this neighborhood because of its aesthetic appeal and well-maintained properties. I have been a firm believer that if an HOA was properly managed, it could improve the value of a community by keeping things organized and ensuring everyone followed reasonable standards. But unfortunately, power-hungry HOA board members are a common occurrence, and I was about to experience firsthand how far some of them would go to enforce ridiculous, biased, and completely arbitrary rules. Everything was fine for the first few months. My neighbors were friendly, the area was peaceful, and I had no issues. But that all changed the moment the HOA decided that I was their next target. The first warning, a letter in my mailbox. One morning, I was going through my usual routine, having coffee on my porch, when I noticed a letter in my mailbox from the Homeowners Association. I wasn't particularly worried at first. Maybe it was just a general update or a reminder about landscaping or garbage collection. But as I unfolded the paper and read through it, my confusion quickly turned into irritation. The letter stated that my household was in violation of the community parking rules and that I was being fined for having too many vehicles. I frowned, rereading the letter to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding something. Sure, I had several cars, but my property had a huge driveway that could fit them all comfortably. None of them were parked on the street, and my neighbors never had trouble parking their own vehicles. It wasn't like I was causing a traffic jam or blocking anyone's access. So, why was I suddenly being fined? To make matters worse, the fine wasn't small. The letter demanded an immediate payment of $1,000 and threatened that if I didn't comply, they would continue to increase my HOA fees until I removed the excess vehicles. It didn't make sense. I had seen plenty of houses in the neighborhood with multiple vehicles. Some homes had RVs, boats, motorcycles, and multiple trucks parked on their driveways. If this was truly an HOA policy, why was I the only one being fined? That's when I started to suspect that this wasn't just about parking rules. This was something personal. The investigation, who else got fined? Before responding to the letter, I decided to do some investigating. I took a walk around the neighborhood, counting the number of vehicles in different driveways. Sure enough, there were at least 5 homes that had just as many, if not more, cars than I did. Some homes had trucks with trailers, others had sports cars lined up on their property, and a few even had commercial vans that I was certain didn't belong to the homeowners. But as I casually asked some of my neighbors if they had received the same fine, every single one of them said no. So, why was I the only one being targeted? The HOA meeting, confronting the board. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to get some answers. I arrived early and took a seat near the back, watching as Linda, the HOA president, strutted into the room like she was royalty. Linda was the type of woman who lived for authority. She dressed like she was running a corporate empire, not managing a residential community. And from the moment she started speaking, it was clear she enjoyed the power she had over people. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up and asked about the parking violations. I calmly explained that I had noticed several other homes with multiple vehicles and wanted to understand why I was being fined while they weren't. Linda gave me a smug smile before responding, "Ah, yes. You're the one with all the cars." That immediately set me off. The one with all the cars? What did that even mean? Linda continued, "We only enforce the rules when we receive complaints, and unfortunately, multiple people have complained about your property." I stared at her, dumbfounded. So you're telling me that even though half this neighborhood has multiple cars, I'm the only one getting fined because someone complained? Linda folded her hands in front of her and said, "That's how the HOA works. We maintain standards based on resident concerns." I wasn't buying it. There was no way that multiple people had complained about my property. More likely, this was just 1 or 2 board members who had decided they didn't like me and were now abusing their authority to make my life difficult. Then, things got even worse. Linda sat up straighter and announced that the HOA had voted to increase my monthly fees until I complied with community standards. Not only was I being fined for my cars, but now they were punishing me financially for daring to question their authority. I was furious. Linda's power trip, the last straw. I asked for proof of the complaints. I asked for the specific rule I was violating. And do you know what Linda said? She leaned forward, smirked, and said, "If you can't afford to follow the rules, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." That's when I snapped. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about property values. This was about control. Linda and her little band of HOA enforcers thought they could bully me into submission. They thought I was just some random homeowner who had no choice but to bow down to their authority. But what they didn't know, what they had no clue about, was that I wasn't just another resident. I was the one who owned the entire development. They had been harassing their own landlord, and I was about to make them regret every single decision they had made. A few days later, I received a certified letter from a so-called attorney representing the HOA. It claimed that if I didn't pay the fines, the HOA would initiate legal action to have my property seized. They really thought they could intimidate me with legal threats. I read through the letter carefully and instantly noticed several red flags. The law firm listed didn't exist. A quick online search confirmed that there was no record of it anywhere. The letter wasn't notarized, and the formatting was completely unprofessional, almost like it had been written in Microsoft Word by an amateur. The attorney's signature was just a scribble, not an official digital signature, not even a proper cursive signature. This was a fake legal threat. I could have called them out immediately, but I wanted to see just how far they were willing to take this scam. So, instead of responding, I waited. The HOA tries to file a lien and gets a nasty surprise. A week later, I received another letter stating that since I hadn't paid my fines, the HOA had officially started the process of placing a lien on my home. I almost burst out laughing. You see, an HOA can't just place a lien on a home whenever they feel like it. They need to file a claim with the county records office and follow proper legal procedures. And since I was the legal owner of the entire neighborhood, I had full access to all HOA financial filings and legal claims. I logged into the system and checked. There was no lien filed. They had lied. Again. At this point, I had enough evidence to completely dismantle the HOA board. I had white heavy checkmark, a fake legal threat letter sent on behalf of a non-existent attorney. White heavy checkmark, multiple fraudulent fine notices unfairly targeting my property. White heavy checkmark, a false claim of a lien that had never been officially filed. White heavy checkmark, a clear pattern of selective enforcement against me while ignoring other violations in the community. It was time to end this game. The HOA board meeting, the moment of truth. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in calmly, holding a stack of documents. Linda and the rest of the board members were already there, smirking like they had won. Linda leaned back in her chair. "I assume you're here to finally comply?" I smiled. "Oh, I'm here to discuss the parking fines and a few other things." I placed a fake attorney letter on the table. "Would you like to explain why you're sending fraudulent legal threats?" Her smile vanished. Before she could respond, I pulled out the unfiled lien notice. "And why did you claim to file a lien on my home when the county has zero record of it?" At this point, the room was dead silent. The other board members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But I wasn't done. I took a deep breath and leaned forward. "Linda, you've spent the last month harassing me, raising my HOA fees, and threatening me with fake legal action. But here's the thing. You never once checked who actually owns this neighborhood." Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I grinned. "I own this entire development. Every house, every lot, every street. The HOA technically works for me." Her face went completely pale. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear a pin drop. And that's when I dropped the hammer. I've already contacted a real attorney. The fake legal threats, the fraudulent fines, and the misuse of HOA funds? That's enough to get the entire board removed and sued. Linda opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "This meeting is over. Effective immediately, I'm dissolving this HOA." And just like that, Linda's reign of terror was about to come to an explosive end. Linda's face went pale as the words left my mouth. The entire HOA board froze in shock, looking at me like they had just seen a ghost. They had spent the last month harassing me, fining me, and even threatening me with fake legal action, and now they had just learned that I was the actual owner of the entire neighborhood. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Linda laughed nervously. "That's impossible," she said, shaking her head. "You're just a homeowner. You're not on the developer's paperwork." I smiled and pulled out the deed records. "I bought this entire development 2 years ago. Every house, every lot, every street. You see, I'm not just another resident. I'm the one who allowed this HOA to exist in the first place." Her jaw dropped. One of the other board members muttered, "Oh my God." The panic sets in. The board members started whispering to each other. Some of them were clearly sweating, realizing they had just spent weeks harassing their landlord. Linda snapped out of it first. She tried to regain control of the situation, straightening her blazer and adopting her usual condescending tone. "Even if that's true, you still have to follow the HOA rules like everyone else," she sneered. "You can't just do whatever you want." I chuckled. "Actually, I can, because as the property owner, I have the legal authority to dissolve the HOA immediately." Silence. Linda's smug expression vanished. You can't just dissolve the HOA," she sputtered. "That's not how it works." I pulled out another document, one that I had prepared in advance. "Actually, it is. Since this HOA was established under my ownership and with my permission, I have the right to terminate its authority over the neighborhood. And effective immediately, this HOA no longer exists." Linda's breakdown, losing all power. Linda stood up so fast that her chair nearly toppled over. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "This is illegal. You need the approval of the board members and a community vote." I shook my head. "Not if I'm the sole developer and property owner. See, if this were a resident-led HOA, that would be different. But since the HOA was originally created by the developer, I'm the only one who has the final say. And since I own all the undeveloped lots in this neighborhood, I hold the majority vote." She stared at me in horror, finally realizing just how much power I actually had. I turned to the other board members. "That means you're all out of a job. Effective immediately." One of them, a middle-aged man who had been quiet up until now, sighed and rubbed his temples. "Well," he muttered, "I guess that's that." He started gathering his papers, clearly accepting defeat. But Linda? She completely lost it. "You don't understand," she shrieked. "This neighborhood needs an HOA. Without us, it will fall into chaos. People will start leaving trash on their lawns. They'll paint their houses hideous colors. We'll have disaster on our hands." I folded my arms. "You mean people will be able to live in their homes without being harassed over minor things?" Sounds like a dream come true, exposing the HOA's corruption. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled out one final document, a detailed financial report of the HOA's expenses. Thanks to my access as the neighborhood's legal owner, I had been able to dig into the bank records of the HOA. And what I found was shocking. Before we end this meeting, I said, I'd like to show everyone exactly how their HOA fees were being spent. I placed the financial records on the table, making sure every board member could see them. Then I turned to the rest of the room, the homeowners who had been forced to put up with Linda's nonsense for years. "Did you all know," I said loudly, "that your HOA fees were supposed to go toward neighborhood maintenance, road repairs, and community improvements?" People nodded. That was common knowledge. I smiled. "Well, funny thing, none of that money actually went to any of those things." The homeowners started whispering. Linda's face turned bright red. I pointed at the financial breakdown. Over the last 3 years, a significant portion of HOA funds were spent on things like administrative costs, except these administrative costs weren't for things like legal fees or neighborhood services. They were direct payments made to Linda and a few select board members. Gasps. I flipped to the next page. Oh, and let's not forget this. HOA funds were used for personal expenses. Multiple transactions show payments made to luxury restaurants, travel expenses, and even a high-end spa. Linda lunged for the papers, but I pulled them away. "Not so fast. You don't have the right to access those records," she stammered. I smiled. "Actually, as the legal owner of this development, I do. And I've already forwarded these records to a real attorney. This is called embezzlement. Linda, she looked like she was about to faint. The residents turned against the HOA. At this point, the entire room was against her. Homeowners started shouting questions. So this is where our money has been going? I knew something was off. My requests for maintenance were always ignored. Are we getting our money back? Linda tried to defend herself, but nobody was listening anymore. The HOA board members quickly grabbed their things and started heading for the door, not wanting to be caught up in the storm. And then, just to put the final nail in the coffin, I made one last announcement. I'll be working with legal counsel to ensure that any funds that were misused are returned to the homeowners. The crowd erupted in applause. The aftermath. HOA is gone. Linda faces consequences. Within a few days, I had officially dissolved the HOA, making sure the residents no longer had to deal with arbitrary fines and harassment. Instead, I hired a small community management company to handle actual maintenance, with no unnecessary rules or power-hungry board members. As for Linda, she wasn't so lucky. Once word got out about the financial misconduct, homeowners began filing legal complaints. An investigation was launched, and within a few months, Linda and a few of her fellow board members were facing real charges. She ended up losing everything. Her reputation? Destroyed. Her control over the neighborhood? Gone. And worst of all, she was forced to sell her home and leave. The neighborhood thrived without the HOA, and the homeowners finally had peace. And me? I stayed right where I was, enjoying my property with as many cars as I wanted.